Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. William Ho from Kaiser San Jose. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Donald Abrams from Donald Abrams from OSHA Clinic at UCSF. He's a practicing integrative oncologist and also clinical professor of medicine at UCSF. He also practices out of Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. Today we have a real treat. He's going to tell us what is the best diet for anti-cancer, and it's entitled up there, yeah, Alkaline, Paleo, Ketogenic, Macrobiotic, or Vegan. Are any really anti-cancer? Let's welcome Dr. Abrams.
Yeah, so of course I see a lot of patients who want to ask me about one of these particular diets. And we just published an article last November, which I think I made available to Anita Lee here to have as a handout on this question exactly, so you can read and see what I'm talking about. So yeah, so all the time I'm asked, well, what about the blank diet? Is it really anti-cancer? And Marion Nestle, who called herself Nestle instead of Nestle, so she's not confused with that company, wrote in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago about 3 questions to ask about each diet that people are curious about that have a name. What is it? Is the rationale behind it logical? And does it promote health? So let's look at some of the diets that people ask about. The alkaline diet's been around for a long time, and people always ask me about the alkaline diet. And the premise here is that the standard American diet, abbreviated appropriately as SAD, is highly acid-forming, and that overwhelms the body's mechanism for removing excess acid. This diet is based on the theory that an acid environment causes and promotes cancer, and the alkaline diet is in fact said to reduce the acid load, helping to reduce strain on the acid detoxifying systems. And the diet generally asks patients to monitor the pH, the acid-base composition of their urine using a dipstick. So that, I think, is a little bit already too much to ask you. And 80% of alkaline foods are vegetables, low-sugar fruits, and some legumes. And alkalinizing vegetables are beets, broccoli, cauliflower. So all the good things that I said that we should eat, alkalinizing fruits are apples, bananas, berries, grapes. And the acid-forming foods, so the diet wants you to eat 80% alkaline and less than 20% acid, which is meat, dairy, eggs, corn, wheat, coffee, sugar, and alcohol. So if you look at the diet, I think it's the right diet, but for the wrong reason. So I recommend a similar diet, but I don't think people need to be checking their urine to see if they're acid or base, because in fact, the body maintains our acid-base balance in a very narrow range compatible with life. So you cannot actually change the acid or alkaline environment of your internal organs by what you eat. And in fact, even more disturbing is a new article came out suggesting that cancer prefers alkaline to acid. So turning the whole premise for this diet on its head. So again, lemons and oranges, which we think of as citric acid, is alkaline according to the diet. So for me, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm not a big fan of the alkaline diet because, again, if the kidney function is normal, the body maintains the optimal acid-base level of the blood in a very narrow range, and the urine pH that people are checking doesn't really reflect the change in the body's pH. It reflects that they're peeing out a lot of alkaline because they're eating a lot of alkaline food. And the diet may actually, in fact, be low in protein, calories, vitamin D, and calcium, although it is high in fiber and plant nutrients, which is good. There's no clinical diet on this benefit. There's no clinical data on the benefit of this diet in cancer. So, as I said, I think it's the right diet or a good diet, but for the wrong reason. Another one, maybe not as popular with the patients I see with cancer, is the Paleolithic diet, known as the Paleo diet, which is founded on the premise that we should only eat foods that our ancestors ate during the Paleolithic period. So already that's a little bit strange. So features foods that were gathered or hunted by our ancestors before the advent of agriculture, and it contrasts with the high carbohydrate diet in that it reduces inflammation, reverses diabetes, lowers blood pressure, and is said to decrease the risk of cancer. So some of the assumptions that are made if we're going to accept this diet is that our genes have not changed much since the Paleolithic era 30,000 years ago. And in fact, we know that that's not true because Irish genes changed with the introduction of potato as a staple. And the gene to digest lactose was induced by people drinking a lot of dairy products. So it also presumes that we know what our prehistoric ancestors ate and that the food available then is available now. So the nuts and seeds of today, from what we know by looking at archaeological stuff, is found to be different from back then. So this diet includes fruits and shoots, flowers and buds, young leaves, roots and bulbs, nuts, animal meat and organs, bone marrow, fish, insects, larvae, and eggs. And excludes all grains, really, beans, dairy products, refined fat, and sugar. So certainly these are things that I'm happy to have excluded. Hence, it provides more fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol, and less carbohydrate than the guidelines, however, because of all of this stuff that is suggesting that we eat. And then this study said that there was an inverse association between the whole grain intake and weight gain, and consistently less weight gain observed in those consuming 48 to 80 grams a day of whole grains compared with never or rare consumers. So in fact, whole grains can lead to decreased weight, and this is something that's totally taboo in the Paleolithic diet. And then at my Whole Foods, I saw Paleo charred sauté has charred garlic, olive oil, white wine, salt, and pepper. And I wonder if white wine was really something that our Paleolithic ancestors consumed very much. I guess much more than the paleo, I get questions all the time about the ketogenic diet. So this is a diet that induces ketosis, the state of having elevated blood ketone bodies in the blood. Ketone bodies are a form of energy produced by the breakdown of fat. And during periods of prolonged fasting or carbohydrate restriction, blood glucose levels do not meet energy demands, so fat is broken down, leading to ketosis. This diet was actually introduced in the 1920s for children with uncontrolled epilepsy, and it's now actually being looked at in patients with autism, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, and cancer. Particularly my patients who have brain tumors are quite interested in the ketogenic diet. And again, the premise here is that cancer cells can only use glucose for energy, which we've discussed, and they can't use ketone bodies. So the hypothesis is that glucose restriction starves cancer cells, and ketones then are toxic to the cancer cells. So studies have been done in mice, and if you have a ketogenic diet in mice who have brain tumors, it decreased the size of their brain tumor and reduced the production of reactive oxygen species in the tumor cells, enhancing the anti-tumor effects of radiation and prolonging survival. And with regards to humans with brain tumors, there are some positive case reports of transiently beneficial effects. And there are currently 5 ongoing clinical trials in patients with brain tumors looking at the ketogenic diet. But as far as I know, none of those actually have come to be published at this point in time. So a ketogenic diet is characterized by a ratio of fat to protein and carbohydrates of 3 or 4 to 1. So a lot of fat. And the diet usually needs to be initiated in a clinical setting. So this is a sample Eggs Benedict recipe for ketogenic diet. And you'll see, gee, that's a lot of stuff that I don't generally recommend. I haven't talked about dairy in my last presentation, so let me, because I showed you in the dietary risks slide that milk was on the positive side. I advise my patients to avoid dairy. I say there's no other animal that drinks another species' milk. But no other animal drives a car or goes to college, so that's not a very good argument. But no animal drinks milk after they've been weaned. And by the age of 3 or 4, we actually lose the ability to digest the sugars and the proteins in dairy. We make a big deal about fat, low fat, no fat, 2%. It's not the fat. If you want a dairy product, butter or ghee is probably best because it's mainly fat. We talk about lactose intolerance as if it's a disease or a disorder, when in fact it's the norm. And the ability to digest lactose is actually a genetic mutation on the second chromosome found mainly in Scandinavians who needed to digest reindeer milk in times of freeze. Otherwise, the rest of us, particularly Asians, are all lactose intolerant, and we don't know until we stop. So people then always say, what about yogurt? So yogurt or kefir, as long as they're not artificially flavored, artificially colored, and with added sugar, are probably okay. And then people always say, well, what about cheese? And I say, well, what about cheese? Cheese is dairy, you know. So I also watched the film What the Health. I don't know if anybody of you seen What the Health, but it's militant vegan, so you need to take it with a grain of beef. But the only thing I learned in What the Health was that when we digest the casein in cheese, we make it into a casomorph, which complexes with our opiate receptor in the brain, and it's addictive. And that's why people find it so difficult to stop cheese. So you heard me already on eggs. There's cheese, bacon, butter. Whew, that's not what I consider compatible with health. Side effects of the ketogenic diet would be vitamin and mineral deficiencies, elevated blood lipids, constipation alternating with diarrhea, weight loss. So, you know, actually there is some evidence that people who do the ketogenic diet actually, despite the fact that it's all fat, are going to lose weight. Andrew Weil always says, if you put somebody on a cream puff diet, where all they eat are cream puffs, they're going to lose weight, because they're going to get so sick of eating cream puffs that they're going to decrease their intake. So for my patients that are really overweight, I have seen people lose 40 pounds relatively easily by eating this totally unhealthy, cancer-promoting, in my opinion, diet. So it might be a trade-off. Kidney stones, nausea, vomiting, pancreatitis, fatigue, and headaches are also potential side effects of the ketogenic diet. So here's one study where they looked at 20 patients with a recurrent glioblastoma multiforme, the most aggressive brain tumor, put them on a low-carbohydrate diet to assess the feasibility of a ketogenic diet. 3 of the 20 discontinued because they couldn't tolerate it. Urine ketosis was achieved in 12 of the 13 patients. 1 had a minor response, 2 had stable disease. Pretty much there wasn't an adverse effect of the diet, but it wasn't so beneficial either. And again, people are telling me that there are healthy ketogenic diets where they're not looking at foods that are high in trans or omega-6 fats, but they're concentrating on foods high in omega-3 fats, like cold water fish, flaxseed, flax oil, leafy greens, avocado, and walnuts. So there are some potential ketogenic diets that are more beneficial, but in my opinion, I don't believe that the ketogenic diet is anti-cancer. In fact, you know, it contains so many things that are unhealthy that I'm pretty much opposed to it. But I find people, just like vegans, are often very emotionally attached to their diet. I don't want to upset any vegans in the room, but veganism, I mentioned already militant vegans. Every Sunday I get 3 videos from Michael Gregor, nutritionfacts.org. He is a militant vegan who wrote the book How Not to Die, which I thought was a little bit over-promising. And he did a How Not to Die cookbook. And I said, what's this about? But one of my patients told me that it's not how to not die, it's how not to die, i.e. don't die this way. Don't die as somebody who consumes animal products. So Michael Gregor prominent in the film that I just mentioned, What the Health, that contains a lot of militant vegans, and 6% of the US population is now vegan. There is no culture which has had veganism as its traditional diet which has survived. So I think that's an important thing to consider. This is a diet that avoids all animal products completely, and there are many health benefits: protection against cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and some cancers, as well as decreased total mortality. But there are also significant deficiencies in protein, vitamin B12, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, zinc, and iodine. Vegan diet, only 10% of the calories come from fat. Dean Ornish at UCSF did a study that found that in men with prostate cancer, those who were vegan and supplemented their diet with soy, fish oil, vitamin C, E, and selenium, did 30 minutes of exercise daily, and adhered to this regime for 3 months, that the experimental group had decreased prostate-specific antigen while the control groups increased, and they had increased telomerase activity, which is what keeps our chromosomes from breaking down and leading to early death. And at 2 years, the conventional group had conventional therapy was given to only 5% of those who adhered to his program, compared to 27% of the controls. So again, vegetarian is different from vegan, because vegetarians often do dairy or eggs. And this is a study from Seventh-day Adventists who are often in the vegetarian spectrum. And they looked at 77,000 people and looked at their development of colon and rectal cancer. And what they found was that in all the Seventh-day Adventists, colorectal cancer was decreased by 22%, 16% in the vegans, but actually the greatest reduction was in those who also ate fish. So the pesco-vegetarians had a 43% reduction in their risk of colon cancer, compared to only a 16% reduction in the vegans. So I think veganism is not the best diet for cancer risk reduction or for people who are surviving cancer. So macrobiotics is based on the teaching of a Japanese physician that he saw food as the basis for health and illness, which we can agree with, and he saw the changing food habits in Japan as a cause of physical and moral decline. The modern era in Japan was ushered in by the introduction of meat, dairy, potatoes, eggs, white bread, and refined sugar. And he felt that these foods were more appropriate for cold, dry climates, but not for warm, moist island climates, where he thought the proper diet was rice, vegetables, and sea products. So macro means great, and bios means life. The diet emphasizes whole grains and fresh vegetables, and avoids meat, dairy, and processed foods. And the goal here is to provide the body with the essential nutrients to function efficiently without taxing it with toxins or excesses that must be eliminated or stored. Feeling that a body not burdened by these excesses or toxins can heal better. So macrobiotics, I've lived with the macrobiotic chef for 25 years. And when I did my fellowship in integrative medicine, it's the first that I learned about nutrition as a physician, because we didn't learn about that down here at Stanford Medical School when I went. So I would come home after reading my nutrition and tell my husband, you know what, you're right. And he said, I know, because he learned macrobiotics from Michio Kushi, who's the founder of macrobiotics, and he taught me how to eat that way. Although we are not strict macrobiotic, we are modified macrobiotic, because we do eat, as I mentioned, lamb, and I eat fish and poultry. But they did a study. Remarkable case reports have been found online in the internet of people who cured their cancer using a macrobiotic diet. I have never seen that. Clint says he's heard about it when he was studying macrobiotics, but I've never seen it, and so I don't believe it. But consuming macrobiotic diets have lower estrogen levels, which is certainly good for postmenopausal estrogen receptor positive tumors. But there have really been no studies that have looked at the macrobiotic diet. So potential risks of eating that way are weight loss, anemia, low protein, low vitamin B12, which is very important, vitamin D, calcium, zinc, and iron. So macrobiotic, I think it's a good way to eat. It asks you to focus on what's appropriate for the season and the place, so that in the middle of the winter, we don't eat a lot of pineapple in San Francisco, because that's not really appropriate. So we eat a lot of greens and grains. Basically, I eat rice 3 times a day. And, you know, we were in Japan, and he said, "What do you notice about all the people?" And I said, "Well, they're Japanese." And he said, "No, nobody is obese. And everybody eats rice, right?" And so we get into these things, low carb, no carb, you know, it's not right. You have to eat what's appropriate and what's healthy. So other diets that I hear about are the so-called Budwig diet. Crazy. Flaxseed, cottage cheese, and honey twice a day to cure cancer. I don't think so. The Gerson therapy is vegetarian diet. You take 20 organic fruits and vegetables juiced every day, and you do coffee enemas. Avoids all fat and proteins. And then we mentioned already raw food, where no food is heated above 105 degrees to preserve the enzymes in the food. And it's 75% of the diet is fruits and vegetables plus seaweed, and it avoids meat, dairy, and eggs. So these are the macronutrients. The Institute of Medicine recommends that our diet should be about 55% carbohydrates, 20% protein, and 20% fat. The standard American diet, unfortunately, is less protein, more fat, less carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, remember, are fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are carbohydrates. Those are complex carbohydrates. When we say low carbs, those are the simple carbohydrates like white bread, white sugar, white flour, white rice. The paleo diet is really high in fat, but not as high as the ketogenic diet, which basically has, you can't even see the carbohydrates there. Macrobiotic and vegan and Dean Ornish's diet really focus on plants, so are higher in carbohydrates. But again, this is the one that the Institute of Medicine recommends as the optimal diet for health. So you can see that some of those other cancer diets are not really the best options. So there was a systematic review published a number of years ago where the alkaline, raw, macrobiotic, Budwig, Gerson, and ketogenic diets were searched for in the medical literature, and the findings were analyzed. And the conclusion was we did not find clinical evidence supporting any of the diets. Case reports and preclinical data point to potential harm of some of the diets. And the conclusion was that oncologists should engage more in counseling patients on such diets. Again, as I reiterated, my ideal anti-cancer diet is organic. Now, organic, not only to avoid herbicides and pesticides, which are chemicals that we don't need in our body, but a plant that's grown outdoors organically needs to fight to protect itself from other plants, birds and insects, and the sunshine. And the only way a plant knows how to protect itself is by making chemicals. These chemicals, called phytoalexins, turn out to be the phytonutrients that benefit us. So if we're going to let food be our medicine and medicine be our food, organic is more potent than conventional. How many of you try to shop organic? It's more expensive, but we deserve it. The British have done a number of studies comparing conventional to organic produce, and they say there's no difference in macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fat. But they do conclude that there are differences in the micronutrients, the vitamins and the antioxidants, and that's why we're doing organic. Plant-based. I don't think we need to be vegetarian or vegan or raw, but we should have at least 4.5 cups of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruits. Antioxidant rich. Turns out plants are better antioxidants than animal products. Animal products are not particularly good antioxidants. and whole foods. I mentioned earlier about juicing. A lot of my patients want to juice everything or make smoothies. I think it's always better to eat the whole food. I mean, it's fine to have some juice every once in a while or a smoothie, but in general, we benefit from that fiber that's present in the whole food. And I think this is the basis for a diet that's pretty much anti-inflammatory, and that is the goal of the diet that I recommend. Because inflammation, hot, tender, swollen, and red, part of normal healing. But when that goes on inside of us without provocation, it does lead to degenerative diseases of aging, such as dementia, heart disease, and cancer. And there's much that we can do by what we eat and what we don't eat to impact inflammation, and we've talked about that. So my standard recommendations: increase plant-based foods, whole grains, heavily pigmented fruits, the berries. My dachshunds won't go to sleep at night until I give them blueberries. Cruciferous vegetables, I already mentioned. Decrease animal fats. I ask people to decrease dairy, red and processed meats. Poultry should be organic. So what do you eat, Donald? So I eat a lot of deep cold water fish. Salmon, black cod, albacore tuna, herring, mackerel, and sardines for me are a little too fishy. But you know, those are rich in the omega-3 fatty acids. Other fish and seafood are also okay. Decrease refined carbohydrates, sugar, white flour, white rice. In general, brown rice is better than white rice, but if you like white rice, jasmine and basmati are better than sushi rice and standard Chinese or Uncle Ben's. Season with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. And for beverages, think Christmas, red and green, green tea. And again, the guideline now says that we should not drink alcohol. That's the best way to protect against cancer. But if you were to drink alcohol, red wine would be the best beverage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.